So here we talked about equivalent fractions, and that's what we left our first video with. We'll come back to equivalent fractions in just a little bit. Now, the next thing I want to ask you to do is to reduce fractions. There's lots of different ways to do it. If we've got one that's smaller numbers, like the 2, the 12, the 16, the 18, the 42, they're not too bad. That 84 at the bottom, though, that's going to be tough. So if you know what goes into it, for example, I know that 2 and 12 are both even, so using our divisibility rules from earlier this semester, I know I can divide both of these by 2. What you do to the top, you do to the bottom. So 2 divided by 2 would leave me with 1, and 12 divided by 2 would leave me with 6. So this would equal 1/6. Now in my next one, I know that 18 is divisible by 6, and I know that 42 is also divisible by 6. So I could make it a little bit easier on myself if I divided by a bigger number. You could also start with 2 and work your way up, but dividing by 6 starting out, since that's your greatest common factor, that's going to be the best way. Okay, 6 goes into both of these numbers. So 18 divided by 6 would leave me with 3, and 42 divided by 6 would leave me with 7. And that's how that part looks. But when you get 84 and 144, those are kind of big. Okay, so remember how we did factor trees back in the first half? 84, I know that 2 goes into it, so 2 goes into it 42 times. Okay, so 42, 2 goes into it 21 times, and 21 it goes into it 3 times 7 times. So this would be 2 to the second times 3 times 7. Okay, when you got ready to do 144, I know that 2 goes into this one 82 times. That's not right. Let's try that again. 72 times, that's better. Okay, now 72, I know that 8 times 9 goes into 72. I know that 9 is 3 times 3. I know that 8 is 2 times 4. Okay, 3 and 3 and 2, those are prime numbers, so I can stop there with those, but 4 is going to have 2 times 2. So if we count those up, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 2 to the 4th times 3 squared. Okay, so I ask you to use prime factors here. Okay, so if you wrote out the prime factors of 84, it's 2 to the second times 3 times 7. And the prime factors of 144 are 2 to the 4th times 3 squared. Okay, so here's what's going to happen with that. You're going to be able to reduce them. So on the top, if you wrote those out, you have 2 times 2 times 3 times 7. And on the bottom, you have 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. That's going to be the easiest way for me to explain it. So these 2's cross out because there's one in the top and one in the bottom. And these 2's cross out because there's one in the top and one in the bottom. And these 3's cross out right here because there's one in the top and one in the bottom. So what that leaves me with over here is a 7. And what that leaves me with on the bottom is a 4 times 3. So 4 times 3 is 12. So this particular one, by prime factorization, would reduce to 7/12. And that's one of the ways that you could do it. Now, these up here at the top, you could do those that way as well. So you could do those by the prime factors, but you could also write them by their pairs of factors. So for example, 18 is 3 times 6, and 42 is 6 times 7. So the 6's cross out, and you could say, hey, I'm left with a 3, and I'm left with a 7. That's also one of the ways that you could work this one if you wanted to. Okay, so that's your concept of reducing fractions. The next thing we have to talk about is how you get a common denominator. So the way that you get a common denominator is you can find your least common multiple. That's probably your easiest way. So if I'm trying to make these have common denominators, one of the easiest ways I think is to start with a number. I'm going to start with 12, and I'm going to list the multiples of 12. 12 times 1, 12 times 2, 12 times 3, 12 times 4. I could also list the multiples of 18. 18 times 1 and 18 times 2 is 36. Well, once I get the common number, I'll know that's my common denominator. So the common denominator for this one is 36. So if I'm turning 7/12 into a 36, here's what happens. In order to get from 12 to 36, I times it by 3. Well, if I times by 3 on the bottom, I times by 3 on the top. So this would be 21/36. So 21/36 is this 7/12 with a 36 denominator. Okay, so let's talk about 11 over 18. If I'm trying to turn 18 into 36, 18 times 2 would give me 36. So if I times 2 on the bottom, I times 2 on the top, and that would be 22/36. So this one would be 22/36. You'll say, well, what's the purpose of getting a common denominator? Well, one of the reasons you get a common denominator is in order to add or subtract, you have to get a common denominator. And another thing that I'll ask you to do with the common denominators is see which one's bigger. So I can't tell by looking if 7/12 is bigger than 11/18. But I can tell by looking that 22/36 is greater than 21/36. So that's one of the useful parts of having a common denominator as well. Okay, the next one's a little bit easier. If I'm trying to get a common denominator with 5 and 15, I know that 15 is a multiple of 5. So that's pretty easy to do. If I want to turn this into 15, I know that I could say 5 times 3 is 15. And if I multiply in the bottom, I multiply in the top. So this would be 12/15, and this would be 7/15. So these have a common denominator. Okay, so then we want to add fractions. So I've got 3 different ones here. Add fractions with common denominators, with different denominators, and to subtract fractions. Okay, so the first one that I want to try right here. Let me make sure I have my pages lined up like I want them to. 1, 2. I do? Okay, here we go. I want to do 1/12 by 3/12. Okay, when you're adding fractions, you have to have a common denominator. Okay, so I have a common denominator here. It's 12. So when you add fractions, you keep the common denominator. I do not say 12 plus 12 is 24. Don't do that. You keep that denominator. And all you do is add across the top. 1 plus 3. So this is going to be 4 over 12. Now 4 over 12 is going to reduce. And it reduces by 2. So 4 divided by 2 would give me 2. And 12 divided by 2 would give me 6. And so I said, oh, I might not have picked the biggest number. So sometimes you might have to reduce more than once. So I can reduce this by 2. 2 divided by 2 would give me 1. And 6 divided by 2 would give me 3. And that's my overall answer. So let's look at this one again. So I have 1/12 plus 3/12. And what I have to do first is make sure I have a common denominator, and I do. It's 12. So you keep the common denominator. Now all you'll do next is add across the top. So 1 plus 3 would give me 4. So 4/12 is a good answer, but it's not in its simplified form. Now, as far as simplifying it goes, I reduced it twice over there, but there's lots of different ways that you could do it. You could say, well, 4 is 4 times 1, and I know that 4 goes into 12, so you could say, hey, this was 4 times 3. Well, my 4's cancel out because 1's in the top and 1's in the bottom, and that would leave me with an answer of 1/3. So that's one of the ways that I could do it. You could also, like we did up here, say, hey, these are both even, so divide by 2 and divide by 2, and that gives me 2/6. You can say, oh, wait a second, they're still even, so I can divide it one more time and get 1/3. Okay, the second one, is what happens when they have different denominators. You cannot add them with different denominators. So what you have to do first is get a common denominator. Okay, so we have to go back to what we did earlier. I know that 3 goes into 12, so my least common denominator is going to be 12. Okay, so this first fraction is 1/12. It's okay. But this second fraction, I need to write it in 12ths. I have to get rid of the 3 and make it a 12. So the way I go from 3 to 12 is I multiply by 4. And if I multiply by 4 in the bottom, I have to multiply by 4 in the top. So 1/3 is actually the same thing as 4/12. So now that I have a common denominator, I can keep that common denominator at 12, and all I have to do is add across the top. 1 plus 4 is 5. Since 5 doesn't go into 12 or have any common factors with 12, this does not reduce. Okay, so we have one more of those and then we'll stop this video. My last one is to subtract fractions. In order to subtract fractions, you have to have a common denominator. So the first thing I'm going to do is find a common denominator. Okay, so if I have 3/4, okay, that has a 4th in it, so that's good. So this one's okay. But I need to turn 1/2 into 4ths so they'll look alike. So the way that I get from 2 to 4 is I'll say, well, 2 times 2. And if I multiply by 2 on the bottom, I have to multiply by 2 on the top. So this would be 2/4. So we're going to get 3/4 minus 2/4. And remember, I keep that common denominator of 4. And this time you simplify across the top. So 3 minus 2 would be a 1, and this answer would be 1/4.